Production and Outdoor Resources will come to order. Kyle, please call the roll.
Senators Bean,
Here.
Black, Bernskoetter, Brown, Carter, Crawford,
Here.
McCreary,
Here.
Razor, Washington. We have quorum.
We have a quorum. I appreciate everyone who traveled across the state to attend and participate in today's hearing. For those here to testify on legislation, please speak into the microphone, introduce yourself, and address the comments to the committee members. Please keep your comments relevant to the legislation. Once your testimony concludes, the committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions. Please complete the witness appearance form on the table and leave it on the table for our committee amendments, or you can fill those out online. Please silence your cell phone if you've not already. We're going to start by going into executive session this morning on Senate Bill 1281 by Senator Bernskoetter, and then we will hear House Committee Substitute for House Bill 2352, Representative Buchheit-Courtway. So I move to enter executive session. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. We are in executive session. Once again, Senate Bill 1281 is sponsored by Senator Mike Bernskoetter relating to invasive plants. I move this to vote Senate Bill 1281 do pass. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Senator Bernskoetter, would you like to have any comments or any discussion on your bill?
So there is, I think they're still talking about some of the plants that are on this list, and there is a sub in the House, and so if we come up with the exact language, I will do it on the floor, but there is consensus on most of the plants on the list, so if anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer it.
Any questions?
All right.
Kyle, please call the roll.
Senators Bean,
Aye.
Black, Bernskoetter, Brown, Carter, Crawford,
Aye.
McCreary,
Aye.
Razor, Washington.
By your 5-0, we have voted Senate Bill 1281 do pass. I make a motion we exit executive session. Do I have a second? I have a second. We are out of executive session. So once again, we're on to Representative,
Buchheit-Courtway.
well, I was trying to find my notes, but I got everything right here. Buchheit-Courtway on House Committee Substitute House Bill 2352. Representative, the floor is yours.
Good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chair. Thank you for hearing this bill. For the record, my name is Cindy Buchheit-Courtway. I'm the state representative in District 115, which is Jefferson County. I'm offering a bill today that is near and dear to my heart, House Bill 2352. For all of those that know me and the vision I have for Missouri, they know that infrastructure development and repair is one of my top priorities because it invests in our future and future generations of Missourians. Ports and inland waterways are the future of shipping. Historically, Missouri has always benefited from our inland waterways and the ability to ship massive amounts of product. We are literally the state of Mark Twain, of the old steamboats and roadways that served as the beginning pathways for the pioneers that went out west. Still, to this day, our great state serves as the gateway between the eastern and western portions of the United States. The ability for us to work together as a legislature on funding and implementing projects is huge. We are still reaping the rewards of Dwight D. Eisenhower with the I-70 project, a project that he envisioned to help meet the needs of the future. It is my hope that we can try and come together to implement a new vision to meet the transformational needs of Missouri by supporting the ports through my bill, House Bill 2352. Currently, the money that's allocated in the Waterways Port Trust Fund can only be used for the purposes specific undertakings of port development, such as land acquisitions, constructions, terminal facility development, port improvement projects, and other related port facilities. The authorized projects must be located on the navigable rivers of the state, funded by alternate sources so that monies from the funds comprise no more than 80% of the cost of the projects selected and approved by the Highways and Transportation Commission to support a statewide plan for waterborne commerce and capable of completion within 2 years of Highway and Transportation Commission approval. This bill repeals the restricted purposes and requires specified eligibility requirements and changes the time limit for the completion requirement to 2 years with appropriation of funds by the General Assembly. So basically, right now, there is an 80-20 match that would be associated with this. Before this was in place last year, the legislature was the ones who decided what the match would be. We could have picked 80-20, 50-50, 90-10, or no appropriation match. And so this would change that. Also, this would change the part about the Highway Transportation Commission. I have nothing against the Transportation Commission. I just helped vote down a bill in the House the other day on rules that would change a bunch of stuff about the Highway Commission and how they were appointed. I really do respect those guys. But if the legislature says Port X should get $1 million, then Port X should get that $1 million. It should not be that if they don't vote on it on the commission, that it could be allotted to someone else. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for the representative? Seeing none. Anybody here to testify in favor of House Committee Substitute for House Bill 2352? Please come forward. And you can sit at the chair with the microphone. Make sure the microphone's on, and you can proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak on this specific legislation. My name is David Courtway. I'm from Jefferson County, and I am speaking here today in support of this bill. There's a couple of components of this bill that I think is beneficial to counties and people that have a vested interest in the monies in port and infrastructure improvement. Currently, when large sums of money are approved for ports, and if there is a match required, the ports have to find that match. And a lot of the counties, especially first-class counties, and our county being a first-class charter county, our budget year is fiscal year. So the appropriation comes in the middle of our budget year. And if we stay tight to a 2-year requirement to expend these funds due to market conditions and other factors, and then the budgets, the fiscal year budgets for the counties, that can be really constraining and difficult to execute in just the 2 years. So we like the flexibility that there may be an extension, there may be with legislative intent and executive approval, you know, the bills, of course. We like that option. Also, this decision would be made closest to the people, not an agency of the state, the legislative and the gubernatorial approval of the legislation. And I think this bill saw wide support in the House, 145-0. So I think it's a reasonable modification of this bill. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that the legislature and the executive branch should have that say on how this money is spent and whether or not there is a match. So again, I speak in favor of this. Thank you.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, in favor of House Bill 2352. Please come forward, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Derek Good. I am chair of the Jefferson County Port Authority. I appreciate your time this morning, and I would just like to point out that when this bill passed through the House with no negative votes, and I think it's important to kind of rebalance some things that were done in last bill and make sure the legislator still has the power that the legislator needs. And primarily that was my biggest concern with what happened last year, is that it took some of the legislative power and gave it back to the administrative branch on this. And so I just ask that you pass this through committee, and be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, in favor of House Bill 2352. Seeing none, anybody here not in favor of House Bill 2352?
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. My name is Timmy Hunter, and I'm the executive director of the New Madrid County Port Authority. And I'm here to speak in opposition of the changes to the bill. Our port is located on the upper lower Mississippi River at River Mile 885. We're below the confluence of the Ohio River, and we're located between the Mississippi County and Pembroke County ports. I'm going on 26 year as director at the port. I'm the oldest director, but I'm probably the oldest director. So to be honest with you, when I first started, I didn't know what a port was. I just knew that whenever we farmed, and whenever I had to haul beans or corns out to the granary, that it always upset me because there was this big pit of sand, and I couldn't untarp my truck unless I put a bandana over my face. So that's the only thing I knew about the port until I got there, until I got the job. And from the first day, it was evident that I had a whole lot to learn. That first day, I found notification that we'd been written up on an erosion problem that came with widening our Slackwater Harbor. So I learned how to work with DNR. On that first day, the county sheriff visited to welcome me there and served me with papers that we had to remove ourselves from the premises of the port harbor because we hadn't paid our annual crossing fees to the levee district. And before lunch, the bank called, letting me know we had a little over $5,000 in our account, and we needed to pay on one of our loans. And I learned we owed a lot of people a lot of money, and well, since we farmed, I already knew a little bit about owing a lot of people a lot of money. But before the end of the day, I got a call from MoDOT telling me that our $500,000 that had been earmarked for our port was going to be given to another port since MoDOT determined we didn't have the matching funds. So I learned that federal funds could match state funds, and we had a federal grant to widen the harbor. So I learned how to work with MoDOT, and I learned that we could get our match money back. So we got a part of the money, part of that $500,000, and we really didn't need it all. We were good with the other port using it, but we were able to match our grant, and we got to finish our project. Over the years, we've learned that each port is unique with a separate set of problems, a different set of local requirements, different prospects, different tenants. But under Chapter 68 of the revised Missouri statutes, our goals have always been the same, and that's to provide multimodal capabilities through truck, rail, and barge, primarily. And it's utilizing the river as the safest, most cost-effective, and environmentally friendly form of transportation to move freight, whether it's corn, cotton, coal, people. Applying these multimodal capabilities would enable us to encourage economic development to our county and to the region and to the state. I remember my first meeting with the Missouri Port Authority Association, and I honestly don't know if there was an association before that meeting. But we were called together by a former highway commissioner that was also chairman of the port on one of the boards. And at this meeting, he wanted to see us put together an executive board. He discussed the importance of the ports organizing the association and the significance of being vocal when needed and working together as a single voice. He stressed educating and sharing our experiences with each other and future port authorities. He emphasized if one port did something wrong, it would reflect a shadow over all of us. And if a port did well, it reflected positive over all of us. Our port benefited substantially for a while. As all the ports shared at each meeting, I got to learn from some pretty knowledgeable people. So I could take that education back with me. There was very little infrastructure money in those days, and we didn't vote on each project by secret ballot. We talked about each project, we voted on them as a whole, but sometimes one port might find, well, we've got a grant over here that would benefit you, and there always seemed to be some different pots of money that would be thrown into the mix, so that talking about the projects like that and voting as a whole worked well. Sometimes a port would even wait until the following year to utilize their funds because they knew one port needed the funds faster, or they were going to lose, maybe federal funds. So it was really nice during those days. We agreed not to go to our legislators to ask for funds for our individual ports. We would go together as one voice to ask for funding for all ports. We had little funding, but great camaraderie. Chapter 68 during that time hadn't been changed in years. Then there was a little wobble as people started changing to benefit their individual port. So the ports agreed we would come together and work as one when a port wanted or needed a change a section of the statutes that worked well, and that worked very well until it didn't. Mostly because it's extremely hard to get permitted and to do construction on a project within 1 year's time. we had kept searching for a funding source, a designated funding source, but when you've got a really small window to get that permitting and get that construction, that 1 year just doesn't work. And when we heard 2 years, we're like, okay, that can be done. We can handle that. And then we searched harder whenever we started getting requirements for different reporting to come in, and we felt like that's kind of counterproductive. We have a board, they vote on things, we take care of things at our port. So that kind of caused us a little problem. But then we were told that if we could set up a trust fund, that we wouldn't have to follow those regulations, because most of us, we get audited every year anyway because we choose to be audited. We're glad the trust fund is not job-driven, because the majority of the grants available to us are job-driven. So unless we have a tenant coming in with jobs we can expand on, we don't have a chance of receiving one of those grants. We were glad the parameters of the fund closely mirrored Chapter 68. As we heard concerns, the parameters could be made so broad that we would end up in the same situation of having to find a designated funding source for our organization, and keeping other organizations from being able to come in and just move the money anywhere, because we'd worked hard to put this in place. We're not sure what the answer is in changing the trust fund, but we do hope future changes to the fund would include input from all the ports, and that's one thing that we weren't given on the changes to it. But we know that from the trust fund that none of the other ports run in the same situation. We hope that none of the other ports run into the same situation that we did during the last project selection, when money was given to us on one day, then taken away the next. And that's a little tough to explain to your board. We also don't see a problem with removing the 80-20 cost share. But we were told that it had to be in the trust fund in order for the bill to pass, because our legislators wanted to see that we had some skin in the game. But I can tell you, the ports, they've got skin in the game. Even if they don't have the money, they're out there trying to get the money. So we didn't see a problem with that. And at times in the past, we've even borrowed, to be able to have the match. So that was one of the reasons why we were so in debt when I got there. After all, the infrastructure being built by the ports is supposed to have everything to do with moving freight. And basically, the ports are bridges to the marine highway. And I don't think MoDOT has to match state funds by 20%. And we're building a bridge to the marine highway. So I'd like to see us not have to have it. So there probably are some changes. But overall, the whole structure of the bill, would hate to see that change where we have to fight with other organizations besides the ports. And hopefully we'll get over the fighting part and learn to come back together again. Thank you for having me.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, against House Bill 2352.
Lisa Panett with Armorvine, and we are in opposition to this bill. On the first page, when you're taking out for the purposes in the subsection 2 of section 68.035 and for no other purpose, so this is money that was supposed to be allocated and not for any of these other purposes that we're now removing and just leaving it broad. On page 2, we talk about on land owned by a city not within a county and managed by a Missouri Port Authority. This is St. Louis City. So why are we carving out something just for St. Louis City? And for these reasons, we are opposed.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, against House Bill 2352. Please come forward.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tammy Hutchison, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi County Port Authority in the Boot Hill. I'm here today to speak in opposition of House Bill 2352. I'm an accountant with my own business. The port has been one of my clients for 16 years. We provide year-round ferry service between Missouri and Kentucky with the Dorena Hickman Ferry. All 50 states have crossed this ferry. We have quite a bit of tourism traffic in the area. We also involve the transport of ag and other goods between the states. In the event of an earthquake along the New Madrid fault line, the ferry would be an important item, as the river bridges would most likely be damaged. Our port currently consists of one tenant that is a dry dock facility and has been with us for 7 years. We are located just below the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. The Waterways Trust Fund would help us expand our port. I've been a member of the Missouri Port Authority Association since I've started working for the port, and I've been MPAA's treasurer for several years. I can tell you that Missouri ports are a diverse group. In the state of Missouri, you may have a port authority being operated by a city economic development director, a regional economic development group, chamber of commerce director, a tri-state economic development group, or a single county port director like myself. Missouri ports are very concerned about freight transportation and the economy. Varied as well are the needs of each of these ports for infrastructure. The needs of the Missouri and Mississippi River system are different, as are the needs of the upper and lower Mississippi River, but one thing is certain: the ports know their transportation infrastructure need and what needs to be constructed to move freight and commodities from truck to barge, barge to rail, and etc. I'm not sure what the answer is. Typically, it's more money. I think it would also need to be cooperation, working with each port to place infrastructure where it needs to go so that commodities can be moved more efficiently. In the past, we worked closely with Senator Bean to establish the Waterways Trust Fund, and we continue to try to collaborate with any proposed changes that would affect our industry as a whole. Unfortunately, while we are supportive of the change in wording to include St. Louis City Port, which is needed, at this time we oppose any other changes. I think we should give the current Waterways Trust Fund language, except for the St. Louis City change, a chance to work for the ports in the great state of Missouri. Thank you.
Any questions for the witness? Been a little windy on that Dorena ferry lately, hasn't it?
Thank you.
Next up, not in favor of House Bill 2352.
Chairman, committee members. Hello, I'm Kerry Harbison, Executive Director of the Southeast Missouri Regional Port Authority. It's located in Cape Girardeau and Scott counties, and I'm also a member of the Missouri Port Authority Association. Seymour Port's tenants handle approximately 2 million tons per year, with over 1 million tons of that being barge tonnage, and most of the barge tonnage is grain or grain-related. I am here in front of the committee to discuss the Waterways Trust Fund and the proposed changes, and I am in opposition to those changes. Again, with the exception of the St. Louis modification. Senator Bean worked very hard and directly with the Missouri Port Authority Association last year to make changes as the bill progressed and ultimately passed. I want to thank Senator Bean for his hard work on this legislation. The Waterways Trust Fund will now allow for ports that receive capital improvement funds from the state to have 2 fiscal years and 1 full construction season to complete those projects. As others have indicated, that's very helpful with some of the projects along the rivers and the variations we have in weather. The upcoming funding and projects for fiscal year 25 will hopefully get to test out and utilize the trust fund for the first time, and I'm very excited to see how it works out. Currently, there are some modifications proposed by House Bill 2352 to the trust fund, and those changes have passed the House. On March 7th, MPAA held a special meeting to discuss those changes. I made a motion to oppose the changes, and my motion read as follows. Motion to oppose House Bill 2352 for the following reasons. The language in the legislation that was passed last year was approved by and passed by the Missouri Port Authority Association with a vote of 7-1. 2 other sets of language were ultimately rejected, and one of those languages is now the proposed language in House Bill 2352. Senator Bean worked very hard to include the language recommended by MPAA, and his support of the ports is very important. The legislation was passed last year, and the ports have yet to be able to utilize the Waterways Trust Fund in its current form, so there is no idea if the language needs to be revised. The motion passed by voice vote, and no opposition by those present was voiced. I again want to stress that MPA has voted twice against this language, the language changes being proposed to the Waterways Trust Fund, with the exception of Section 4.2, where the verbiage was added to correct the small oversight regarding St. Louis City. I believe that language was originally in a standalone bill in House Bill 2216 and is now being proposed in Senate Bill 1263 by Senator Roberts. At MPA's winter meeting, MPA voted unanimously to support House Bill 2216, which would now be Senate Bill 1263. I appreciate the chance to speak in front of all of you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, not in favor of House Bill 2352.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is John Ferguson, and I've worked for the Pembroke County Port Authority since 2006 and have been the executive director since 2016. I have served as chairman of the Missouri Port Authority Association from 2011 to 2013 and was elected vice chairman in June of 2023, and as of April 4th, now serve as acting chairman. Before I begin with my review and concerns of HB2352, I offer a bit of history on the Pembroke Port and the Missouri Port Authority Association. For geographical reference, the Pembroke County Port Authority is located at mile marker 849 on the right descending bank of the lower Mississippi River and is the southernmost port in the state. Pembroke Port began moving freight in 1981, and our current river operations consist of the movement of millions of bushels of grains and oilseeds, thousands of tons of fertilizer and road salt, diesel fuel that comes in by barge and moves outbound by truck to serve the region's retail markets and farmers' cooperatives, and a manufacturing plant that builds barge covers for hopper barges to ensure the cargo being transported is shielded from the inclement weather. On the rail side, we own and maintain approximately 9 miles of railroad that connects with the BNSF Railway. The rail cargo consists of milled rice that is transloaded from truck to rail from a nearby rice mill and serves the nation's pet food market. Cottonseed is purchased from the region's many cotton gins, is loaded from truck to rail, and transported by unit train to California to feed dairy cattle. Plate steel that provides the raw input in times of food and drought required by our county's largest employer, thereby allowing them to maintain the area's employment base throughout extreme river fluctuations. From 2012 to 2018, we moved millions of barrels of crude oil from North Dakota, transloaded from rail to barge, and delivered to refineries along the inland rivers and Gulf Coast, helping to alleviate the nation's energy transportation bottleneck then occurring at Cushing, Oklahoma. The Missouri Port Authority Association was established in 1999 and holds its annual meeting hosted by one of its member ports in June or July. At this meeting, we review plans and progress of capital improvement projects and share ideas on port development. The association works collaboratively to evaluate member ports' proposed capital improvement projects, and using a scoring matrix developed by the association grades the projects to ensure the Missouri taxpayer gets the most benefit for its tax dollars. The association has also worked with MoDOT on their scoring matrix for administration funding to ensure that new ports get a higher percentage of the funding to allow them to establish, grow, and develop. Regarding House Bill 2352, to fully understand the implications of House Bill 2352 on Missouri's public ports, we must first consider the intent of the Missouri legislature when it established Chapter 68 of the revised statutes. Chapter 68 was established by the legislature to promote waterborne commerce on Missouri's God-given natural assets, the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. As the Missouri Port Authority Association and its member ports have demonstrated, working within Chapter 68 has enabled the state of Missouri and its public ports to support 290,000 jobs annually, generating $15.7 billion in income for labor and generating $100.6 billion in economic activity. This is from a 2016 executive summary that provided by MoDOT that I will provide to you. The goal of the Waterways Trust Fund, as passed by the General Assembly last year, at its core, was to give public ports a full construction season to get our projects completed. Prior to passage of the trust fund, ports were required to complete our projects and expend our funding within a single fiscal year. Using the state fiscal year timeline for construction activities along Missouri's inland rivers was a limiting factor in timely project completion, as we were not allowed a full summer of dry weather to complete construction. By the time funding was allocated from the state and project bidding and letting took place, it was often well into August, leaving September and maybe October for construction activities. November typically brings shorter days, cooler temperatures, and increased precipitation, severely limiting or halting construction activities. Our next construction window, barring a spring flood, typically resumes in May, and our funds were required to be expended or returned by June 15th. The state fiscal year was simply not conducive to construction activities along Missouri's rivers. My oppositions to the modifications of the Waterways Trust Fund, as proposed in House Bill 2352, is due to its negative impact on Missouri public ports and the goals of the Missouri Port Authority Association. The Missouri Port Authority Association was established specifically to promote and develop the usage of Missouri ports and navigable waterways. When you read the details of House Bill 2352, specifically lines 12 and 13, and its resultant removal of Chapter 68.035, Paragraph 2, you will notice that by removing subsection 2, essentially everything that it means to be a Missouri public port under Chapter 68 is stripped away. Instead of just modifying the language to eliminate the grant match requirements and MoDOT's oversight, they stripped out the language that, in my view, makes a port, thereby allowing funds appropriated to the Waterways Trust Fund to become a slush fund for any city or county located on or adjacent to a navigable waterway in the state. Funds allocated to the Waterways Trust Fund, if allowed to be modified by the language in House Bill 2352, would be available for projects like shopping malls, parking lots, apartment complexes, and commercial office space. As evidence of this attempt, you need to look no further than the original version of House Bill 2352, where lines 15 and 16 of the enacted Waterways Trust Fund state, on or adjacent to a navigable river of this state, were stricken from the definition of a capital improvement project. As demonstrated by the port representatives you have heard speak in opposition to House Bill 2352 and evidenced by the economic impact study of Missouri's public ports, the majority of us have been successful, or are striving to be, by working within the guidelines of Chapter 68. I do not believe that it's beneficial to the majority of ports or the taxpayers of this state to accommodate the minority by stripping away the goals of a statute that's been working for nearly 50 years, by removing the guardrails of port project development and putting blinders on those in charge of its oversight. The legislature has enacted other incentives to support land-based economic development activities like industrial development authorities and TIF districts. Port funding appropriated by the legislature should be utilized to support actual ports. Other economic development projects should use the programs enacted by the legislature to promote those projects. By eliminating the transportation language in 68.035, paragraph 2, the language proposed in House Bill 2352 will dilute the benefits of appropriations made to Missouri's legitimate public ports.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for testimony. Anybody here else not in favor of House Bill 2352? Seeing none, anybody here for informational purposes only?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jim McNichols. I'm the Executive Director of the Jefferson County Port Authority. I'm here to testify for informational purposes, and just, I guess the easiest way for me to do it is to give you a real-world example. In 2021, the Jefferson County Port Authority lobbied and secured $25 million from you all for the purposes of developing ports within Jefferson County. At that time, you guys, the legislature in its infinite wisdom did not put a match requirement on that money. It said basically you can spend the $25 million to develop ports within your port district, and our port district is the geographic and political boundaries of Jefferson County. So we moved forward thinking that we were going to be able to use that money for a variety of different projects that we're working on. Until we got to the issue of the financing agreement with MoDOT. And when the financing agreement with MoDOT showed up, Not only did it have a 20% match, which was not the intent of the legislature when they passed it and the governor when he signed it, but in addition to that, it limited our ability to use that money to Herculaneum, Missouri. Not within the Port District, strictly to Herculaneum, Missouri. We see administrative overreach all the time. I'm not here to bash MoDOT. I'm just here to give you a sense of where we're coming from. With regard to MPAA, I am a board member of MPAA. I will tell you, at the February 27th meeting, we had a vigorous discussion about this. And at that time, MPAA took no position because the organization had as many folks that were opposed to it or had questions about it as were supportive or ambivalent on it. Later, on March 7th, a meeting was held that I don't believe was properly sourced or properly noticed, according to Sunshine. It was held with 7 members of a 16-member board. And there were inferences made at that meeting that the senator was opposed to the legislation. Senator Bean was opposed to the legislation. Since then, we found out, so at least the sponsor talking to the senator, that that was not the case. Again, I'm not here to attack MPAA. I'm just sharing the facts. You know, I think we get into a position, especially ports or anybody else who works with the department, of giving a lot of deference to the department, and I understand that. I get that. I think it's important to recognize that all those departments ultimately are accountable to you guys. And you set the tone in the legislation and the appropriations that you pass. And so for the purposes of this legislation, like I said, I really feel, you know, we need to do something about the overreach that goes on with regard to some of these agencies. And so that's really the reason that Representative Courtway came to us. You know, we talk about this removal of the on or adjacent to language. That was discussed extensively at the MPAA board meeting in February, and the representative agreed to add that language back in at the request of members of the MPAA. And then the MPAA, a week later, after the full board decides to take no position, takes a position. So those are the facts. So that's all I have to say.
Any questions for the witness? Senator McCreary?
Good morning. Could you
morning.
clarify what you were saying about Herculaneum? So are they outside of the footprint of?
No.
Okay.
Herculaneum's on the river. So when the language was passed, like I said, it was passed to allow us to do projects conceivably anywhere within our port district. In our port district, we lobbied MoDOT and were able to get a designation of the entire geographic political boundaries.
I remember
So conceivably, that would allow us to do a port project in, say, High Ridge, which is 10 miles from the river. That just gave us flexibility. You know, we're a growing county. We want to be able to do economic development primarily on the river. Yeah, Kimmswick as well, where we have an issue with high water or low water for our excursion boat dock. So that gave us the flexibility the way that it was intended, that the legislature wrote it, the legislature voted on it, it went to OA for their review, it went to MoDOT for their review. They recommended to the governor that he sign that appropriations bill. At any point along that way, if MoDOT or MPA or somebody else had a problem with that, they could have raised that issue, but they didn't. So the bill was passed, was put into law, and then the administrative agency responsible for administering it decided that they wanted to put conditions on that money, when the legislature did not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, for informational purposes only.
Good morning, Jackie Barget, registered lobbyist for the St. Louis City Port Authority. As has been mentioned before, we are very, very grateful that Representative Buchheit-Courtway was willing to add legislation into her bill in the House committee that would add St. Louis back in as an eligible entity to receive funds from the Waterways and Ports Trust Fund. It was an unintentional exclusion from the language that was passed last year that we did not catch until it was too late. But just to clarify some of the comments that were made earlier, we worked with Missouri Port Authority Association and MoDOT to make sure that the language was okay and everyone was comfortable with how we were doing this, because the current language and statute right now says that eligible entities have to be located on land owned or held in long-term lease by a port authority. And St. Louis Port Authority does not own or hold any of their property in long-term lease. They're very unique in that their port authority is only along the riverfront as well, but they only hold one small portion of their port district in long-term lease. So the language just says, or on land owned by St. Louis City, managed by a Missouri Port Authority. And it says that the money has to be pulled out at the request of a Missouri Port Authority, which is the language that we kind of agreed upon to make sure that it was only the Port Authority in the city of St. Louis that would be eligible for that.
Any questions to the witness? Seeing none, thank you for testimony. Next up, for informational purposes only. Seeing none, Representative, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention that I did have a lot of members of the MPAA in my office when I was getting ready to present this in the House, and they had several questions. Matter of fact, Mr. Ferguson was one of them in my office. He had very many questions. I answered every question that he had except one, but I did get him an answer that night on that. They brought me, MPAA brought me one change that they wanted, which was that it had to be on the water, and I agreed to that change. I put an amendment on the floor to reflect that. So I have worked with MPAA, and so I just wanted to let you all know that I'm not just here trying to advocate for the Jefferson County Port. I am trying to help all of our ports in Missouri, because I think that that ports are a valuable asset to Missouri, and excuse me. Sorry. And I believe that infrastructure is necessary for Missouri to thrive. And so that's why I'm presenting this bill, because I feel that this is right for Missouri. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. That will conclude the hearing on House Committee substitute for House Bill 2352. Just want to tell the committee that we will have a quick executive session tentatively scheduled for Thursday, probably about 9:45, right before session starts. And with that, no further business coming for the body or for the committee. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you.